This is the last class of the series, and I think it's very important to go through what we're about to go through. And that is when dealing with working on our spiritual sensitivities and our religious approaches. And essentially what we've been working on through the Four Rivers is the elimination of the ego. Or at least a healthy prioritization of identity. Who are we essentially? The ego's there, but how significant is it? How much does it center in our day-to-day identity? What is primary? Now, I'll give you the following story, which I think will give us an introduction as to what this class is about. I remember when I was in yeshiva in Orpah in Israel, there would be lots of interesting circumstances that would take place by the yeshiva bochrim that were there. And one of those were that when a person would make a blessing on food, they learned that they needed to do it with kavanah, with intention. And the more intention equaled, the more you scrunch up your face. Okay, so if you were doing it with a lot of intention, the more pain you could exhibit on your face meant the more intention you had. You know? And I remember, I was one of those individuals. I had perfected the scrunching of the face to the extent that, the brain was about to pop because of the blood vessels. And someone said to me, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. I thought they were wrong. And I understand that in order to get into a state of sensitivity, you need to close your eyes sometimes. You need to do some actions that exhibit sensitivity. But what I want to speak about today is spirituality. Be very careful with what I'm about to say. Spirituality is not a serious thing. Okay? Not to say it's not important, and it's not serious in the sense that it has deep, deep implications and it's deeply relevant. But it's not a serious thing. It's not something that is very heavy. And when working on a person's state of spirituality, they can easily get into the mentality that the more spiritual you become, the more serious you have to be, and the more heavy you have to be, and the more upset and scrunched of face you have to be. And this is a very dangerous reality that exists when people become spiritual, that they increase the expectations that they have of themselves, which is good, it's healthy. But what is unhealthy is that they start to define themselves by those actions. So where we've been defining our danger or dangerous definition of self within egoic identities such as physicality, such as experience, such as a state of emotion or anger or being specific on everything, there is another hidden state of the ego which many people don't realize exists, and it's one of the most dangerous ones. And that is found in the verse that we say in Mariv. We say that the Satan exists behind us and in front of us. Which means that sometimes it exists behind us, just pulling us back. Hey, come on, just engage with pleasure and physicality and do nothing. Be lazy. And it sometimes prevents us from moving forward in that way. The Satan will also be able to immobilize you when it's in front of you. You did what? You actually did this after you learned all of these classes in the Four Rivers about how ridiculous it is to define yourself by your emotions and by your thoughts and by your desires, and you actually defined yourself by that? What a failure you are. You got no hope. No hope. And the Yetzer Hara stands in front of you and says you can't keep up. And it makes you start to lose your ego egoically. So it's a trick. It's a trick where you start to define yourself by your success and failure within your religious practice, which is the whole point of religious practice, is to not define yourself by success and failure anymore. It's about tapping into life and tapping into what is and being present and being really, really focused on life itself, as opposed to defining itself by, or defining yourself by the illusory self. But suddenly we conceptualize this whole act, this whole avodah, this whole service, and it itself turns into an egoic form of losing the ego. And this is something we find in the story of Cain and Abel, where it says that Cain failed. Where did he fail? God didn't turn to his sacrifice. He turned to the sacrifice of Abel. Even though Cain was the instigator, he was the one that invented, so to speak, this form of service, even though some say that Adam also did so. But in this case, God turns to Abel. And it says that Cain was much distressed and his face fell. And the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you so distressed? And why is your face fallen? Surely, if you do right, there is uplift. But if you do not do right, sin stays at the door. It waits for you to prance on you." Which means the essential victory of the ego or the Yetzer Hara is not that it gets you to do something wrong. No. The essential victory of the Yetzer Hara, of the egoic force inside of us, the Trojan horse of religiosity, is that it gets you to sin, but then it gets you to identify with that sin, to start to embody that sin, to start to let it seep into you and infect you at your core, to the extent that you say, "Oi, Gewalt, what am I going to do? How could I have let myself down? How could I have let God down?" And I remember when I was a bocher, even before Or Sameach, I remember one day there were different practices that we would have in the afternoon. After the morning learning, before the afternoon learning, we'd try and spend some time doing exercise or doing something productive. And I remember one day I sat there and I said, "You know what, let's watch a video. We'll watch something, watch a short film, just to, take your mind off things." Not to say that that's the best thing to do in a yeshiva, but that's where we were. That's where we were as people. And I remember that I ended up watching that film for a little bit over time, and instead of praying in the actual yeshiva with their minyan, I ended off having to go somewhere else because I was maybe 5 or 10 minutes late. I would have to pray somewhere else. And then I went back and I learned with everyone. And I remember that I learned that you should pray, the ideal place to pray is where you learn. And I remember I got so upset at myself that I was late for 5 to 10 minutes and didn't pray in the place that I learned, and I had to go and pray somewhere else, and I was making myself and eating myself inside. How could I have done this? Until I remember an individual saw me and said, "Shmuel, why are you so depressed? What's going on?" And I told him. He said, "You're crazy. Why are you doing this to yourself? Firstly, you're not on such a level to be upset at yourself for that. But what I realize and what we need to realize is that guilty feeling that you consume yourself by, what they call Jewish guilt, is not Jewish at all. There is no concept of Jewish guilt. Okay? What Jews are known for is egoic identity. Of course, that's a Jewish thing. Yes, I understand. But the essence of what it means to be a Jew is to release that egoic identity. So Jewish guilt is not Jewish. Make that clear in your mind. And as we approach the high holidays, this feeling of, I'm such a loser, I'm such a failure, I'm such a negative blotch on humanity, is the most problematic thinking. It doesn't shape any movement. Negativity, guilt, darkness, and depression are the ego. So how do you expect positive movement when you experience that type of emotion? So that's essentially what we see taking place with Cain. And Cain, if you recall, comes from the word kinyan. Kinyan is an acquisition, and Cain was this individual that acquired himself. He acquired himself. It was all about his ego. But what he now found was a religious definition of his ego, and when he failed in that, oi gewalt, his face is fallen, which is his essence. His essence is poured out because he wasn't in touch with his essence. He felt that this is the definition of the self. What does he go ahead and do? Does the most despicable act. Kills his brother, murder. And murder essentially is that you can't identify the essence of another person. You just objectify another person. So of course you come to murder. Because when you objectify yourself, you essentially come to objectify others, and you come to murder. Gemara says in the second source, the Rabbi Orpah was in the marketplace, and Eliyahu, the prophet, came there, and this Rabbi Orpah, Hosea, asked Eliyahu if there's anyone in the marketplace that was a Ben Olam Haba, or Bnei Olam Haba, which means people worthy of the world to come. And Eliyahu's answer to him was, no one here. No one, not one person. And then it says that two individuals walked in, two brothers. And Eliyahu said to Rav Orpah, these two guys, these two individuals are Bnei Olam Haba. So Rav Orpah went up to these men and he said, what do you do? What occupation do you have? And they answered that they are inshe beduche. We are comedians. We are comedians. Badchonim. We make people laugh. That's our job. So out of everyone in the marketplace, and you could assume that there were individuals in the marketplace that were very learned. There were people in the marketplace that would scrunch their face like this and make blessings and be very, very pedantic about details. But none of them were Bnei Olam Haba. None of them were individuals of the world to come. Two jesters come in, two comedians, and Eliyahu Hanavi, this is not me speaking, this is the Gemara speaking, says these two guys, these are Bnei Olam Haba. Because being religious and being spiritual is not a serious thing. It's not a heavy thing. It's one of the most light, freeing, happy states of existence. And what it means to be a person of the Olam Haba, of the world to come, is a person that has sight, has vision of what life is about. And when a person fails and they start to identify with their failure, they've turned into an individual that is evaluating the self. And life's not about evaluating yourself and appraising yourself to say, am I important? You are important. You exist. No matter what you do, your ponim, your existence, your neshama is always there. And yes, we make mistakes and we have to learn from those mistakes and rectify it. But to have this deep, dark emotion after failure is very, very dangerous. I want to give you another case. Go to the last page. Now, failure and identification with failure is so dangerous. I call it the F word. Failure is the F word, because God forbid you should fail at something, and God forbid you should make a mistake within your religious practice. Gosh, if you do that, you are a disaster. You are forlorn. God doesn't have any interest in you anymore, and you might as well pack up shop because you're a disaster. You're a nothing. And essentially, this concept is expressed in the story of Ruth. Ruth had a sister called, page 4 of 5, in the middle. Ruth had a sister called, anyone know? So it says that Ruth had a sister called Orpah. Orpah. And it says that when Ruth carried on with her mother-in-law and said, I will never leave you, I will carry on. She was the successful one of the family. Orpah, her sister, said, you know what, I love you, but I realize that it's not for me and I'm going back. And what the word Orpah means, the Gemara brings this and the Midrash brings this, that Orpah is a reference to the back of the neck. The back of the neck is the oref. And essentially what happened to Orpah was she turned her neck on what was. The Gemara tells us in discussing Orpah that she was immediately confronted on her way back in the most dire action that a person can imagine. She was completely usurped. It says there were hundreds and hundreds of people that took her and defiled her. And it says that included in that was even a dog. And the Gemara brings this to show the effect of failure. That when she realized, oh, I've turned my head, I've turned my neck, and I've failed. That state of emotion is the most destructive place to be in. To the extent that it says she was the mother of the giants. It said all of the giants came out of her. So the concept of Orpah, the back of the neck, when we fail, which is inevitable, do we identify with that failure? Once you identify with the failure, you are now susceptible to being defiled. You are susceptible for all energies to come in and destroy you. To the extent that it says that depression is not a sin in itself, but it is the gateway to all sin. Being depressed and dark and downtrodden is not a sin, but it is the gateway to all sin. And same to happiness, lightness, laughter is not a mitzvah in itself, but it is the essential state of being which leads to all mitzvahs. It is the essential consciousness, that feeling of lightness. Now the interesting thing is, if you take the word Orpah...
Is that why they say you have to do all your mitzvot b'simcha?
100%. So it's heavy and it's depressing and life's so serious and so... It's light, it's beautiful, just relax. Enjoy it. Stop being so serious. Yom Kippur, which people think is the most depressing day of the year, is brought down in the Gemara that is the happiest, one of the most joyous days of the year.
Like we sing, oh God, no.
Yeah, we sing it. We sing these things. It's a day of song. It's a day of freedom. It's a day of oneness, unity, light. Orpah is also a word which, if you rearrange the letters, spell Paro, Pharaoh. And Pharaoh, we know in the source above there, it says that he forced the Jewish people to build cities in Pitom and Ramses. Now, it's brought down in the Gemara that the reason why it caused the Jewish people to build cities in Pitom and Ramses was that these were cities that had quicksand, or the foundation of the ground wasn't very strong, which means that they would come and build, and the buildings would collapse, and he would create a despondency amongst the Jewish people through that. More than it was a physical slavery, this was an emotional, spiritual slavery that we understood took place. And this is exactly how the Yetzer Hara, the egoic force here, functions within religious identity. That it causes you to define yourself by it, and then you're building on quicksand. So when something falls, I stuffed up again. I failed again. I got angry. And the craziest thing is, when you catch yourself catching yourself, when you catching yourself stuffing up, and you say, I'm feeling so depressed, but I know I'm not meant to be depressed, you get even more depressed, because you're getting angry at yourself for identifying, and then you're identifying with identifying. So the entire reality here is one of cessation of thought, cessation of identification with the external, with the conceptual. It's a transcendental state of existence, to the extent that it says that in the heavens, go to the second of the 5 pages. This is in Psalms. It says in Psalms, Tehillim, Yoshev b'shamayim Yisachak, which means the one who is enthroned in heaven laughs. Here. The one who is in heaven laughs. The state of spiritual consciousness is the state of laughter. In fact, it says that God himself, in the 12 hours of the day, specifically sets aside time to laugh. So the Gemara in Avodah Zarah brings that there are 12 hours in the day. The first 3, Hashem sits and engages in Torah. The second 3, he sits and he judges the entire world, etc., etc. And in the fourth 3 hours, it says that he sits and is mesachek. he plays. He sits and he plays. This state of feeling light, of life being something that's light, a state of playing with life. Life isn't so serious. And when you make mistakes, you don't feel so serious. And when you're unconscious, which means that you're even defining yourself by your egoic nature, you're feeling really angry or feeling really depressed or you're feeling really egoic, you want to go buy something, which is again normal. All of these things are normal. You don't get heavy about it. This whole process of growth and development needs to be from a place of observation. Oh, that's interesting. I'm feeling this now. That's reasonable. It's reasonable for me to be feeling like this now. It's reasonable. Not you disastrous excuse of a human being. How dare you feel like this? What a egoic being you are. No. Yeah.
From a place of contemplation, but not judgment.
Not contemplation either. A place of observation. Observe yourself. And it's not even observing yourself. Observe the ego in its state. Okay, interesting. This person said this to me, and I'm feeling really angry. Sure, okay. It's quite reasonable for a person to feel like this. Okay. What's the reason for this? You know, am I identifying with that anger? I'm feeling it, but does that mean that I have to now be subsumed by it?
Then aren't you contemplating once you start to feel it?
Contemplation is then, you know, you're like, it could be contemplation, but there's a danger when the contemplation becomes too much of an analysis. Too much analysis.
Yeah.
Too much, why this, and why am I like this, and why am I acting like that, and why do I have so much going on in me, and okay, I'm in that mood now, look after yourself. Go and do something nice. Go, you know, pamper yourself, or go sleep, or go take a rest. It's reasonable for you to be feeling like this. That's fine. But to make or complicate things and create this darkness, this all-consuming seriousness, is really one of the most destructive ways of being.
It's almost like, you know, when you meditate and you know the thoughts come in, but you don't attach too much meaning to them.
Yes.
Light, like you were saying, like
be light. Yeah. It's even when thoughts come into your mind and you get frustrated or you get upset at yourself and you're like, gosh, I'm so unclear. I've got so much in my mind and I feel this and I feel that. Am I thinking about this? Don't deal with yourself in an angry way. The state of engagement with yourself is one of lightness. One with be careful and sensitive to you. Engage with yourself carefully. You know, I remember one of my teachers in yoga practice, in the form of meditation, would advise that we close our eyes. So I want you to close your eyes now. So open them back up again. Sorry, it's a nice state to be in with your eyes closed, I know. You can wait for tonight. But this instructor told me that when you close your eyes, don't do it aggressively. Don't jam those two eyelids shut. Allow them to meet nicely in the middle, softly, and don't push one. Let them stay there in harmony. And that's the same with our engagement with growth, with spirituality, and with sensitivity to consciousness. This is not an abrasive, violent, forcible type of engagement with the self. This is gentle, compassionate, harmonious, sensitive, and understanding forms of engagement.
But nobody's taught us to treat ourselves the way we treat others.
The Torah has. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha.
No, but
Those two things are really hand in hand.
yeah, but
How you treat others, you need to treat yourself, but you can't even start to treat others if you don't treat yourself kindly. So, I think we need to close this. I think we need to close this window.
very hard to practice. Treating
Some
yourself,
people spend years in therapy to get there.
treating yourself nicely all the time, every day.
Laughing, being happy to laugh.
Are you allowed to laugh at yourself? Or
That is the best one to laugh at.
Yourself.
To laugh at yourself. Funny that I felt like this, or funny that I even feel it's so funny. So funny how not funny as in denigrative, not as putting myself down, just being, it's funny. Life is funny. Everything is funny. Being in a state of laughter.
But not silly. Funny but not silly.
Not silly, but funny. To the extent that I'll show you what taking something or looking at something through laughter and the extent of how much this has to be applied. Have a look at this. I want you to go... Yeah. Go to the bottom of page 1. It says that the rabbis, the sages, and Rabbi Akiva were ascending to Jerusalem after the temple was destroyed. And when they arrived at the mountain on which the temple was built, and they now saw it in its destruction, it says that they ripped their garments, they rent their garments. When they arrived at the Temple Mount, they saw a fox that had emerged from the side of the Holies of Holies, and they began to weep. And Rabbi Akiva was laughing. And they said to him, "For what reason are you laughing?" To which he responded to them, "For what reason are you weeping?" Now, according to Kabbalah, both weeping and laughing exist. And the state of weeping is a natural state. So when there is pain, when there is loss, God forbid, when there is suffering, there is obviously a state of weeping. And it says that in the heavens, and it's not up there, in reality, there are two rooms. There's the external room of God and there's the internal room of God. It says that in the external room of God, all you hear is crying. But when you enter into the internal room of God, all you see is laughing. Which means within the state of weeping, the internal state is one of laughter. Within the externality of pain, and sometimes it's a little bit more than external, the internal state of being is one of realizing that at the end of the day, truthfully, nothing is as serious as we make it. Doesn't denigrate or undermine the pain. There is pain. But inside of you, the deepest state of consciousness and recognition is that nothing is so serious. Yes, we have to be conscious, and yes, we have to do our best. And yes, we have to really tap into the oneness and dveikus to God. But the internal state of laughing is something that needs to be there. Are these guys people that are working on the campus? Yeah. Let's just stop it. You know what? Leave it. I'll edit it.
And what about death and illness?
So even at a state of death and illness, the externality of it, which is really the internality of it, is a state of weeping. It is a state of weeping.
Okay.
But the internal recognition that I don't ever get anchored by any reality, that my essential self is so much deeper than any form or concept, alleviates the pressure of the weeping, allows you to weep, but from an internal place of laughter.
That's difficult.
It's a very difficult state to achieve, and it's not saying that you stop weeping, but it's weeping from a recognition that at the end of the day, all of the forms and all of the concepts that we closely associate with, all of those forms and concepts essentially are irrelevant. At the end of the day, it doesn't really make a difference.
I want to ask a question. Yitzhak.
Yes, we're going to get to Yitzchak.
Name.
His very name. So let's get to Yitzchak now.
But he was so stern.
Okay, let's get to Yitzchak. Okay? So now, go to the source on page 3 in Bereshis. It says that God spoke to Abraham and he said that as for your wife Sarai, I'll call her Sarah and I'll bless you with a son. And it says that Abraham threw himself on his face, sounds quite painful, and he laughed. He laughed. Vayipol Avraham al panav vayitzchak. Vayomer beliboy. Halaven mea shana yivalid vim Sarah bas tishim shana teled. What? I'm of 100 years old. A man of 100 years old. And Sarah in Israel is in her 90s. And she's going to give birth.
Without a Caesar.
And thus she gave birth and gave the name to her son Yitzchak, laughter. Okay. So now we know that there was a claim against Sarah for laughing. It says that she also laughed. But there was no claim against Avraham Avinu. So why is it that Sarah was, so to speak, held in a state of questionable activity, while Abraham wasn't? Both of them laughed. Both of them laughed. So Rashi tells us a fascinating concept. Abraham's laughter was not one of, I'm 100 and she's 90 and we're going to give birth? Are you crazy? It was like, whoa, I'm 100 and she's 90. And there is no form or conceptual framework in this world that means anything at the end of the day. It's all irrelevant. And whatever happens, happens. And anything can change. And anything is anything. A state of Simcha. A state of true joy. A state of, I sit in the throne in Shemaim. I have clear consciousness of world to come consciousness. The world to come consciousness is that I can live in this world and realize that I'm not really in this world. That this world is a very light place to be in. Yes, there's pain and suffering, but when you connect to your truer self, your deeper self, the lighter self, the spiritual self, life is something of simcha, something of laughter. Where Sarah's laughter, Rashid says, was a language of how would you say in English? A derogatory form of laughter, a sneering, a state of sneering. On her level, what that means. The fascinating concept, according to Kabbalah, is that Yitzchak, the word Yitzchak, has within it,
He will laugh.
well, it's that there's a state of laughter, yeah, but the state of laughter is actually found deeply in the word Yitzchak, because Yitzchak is spelt Yud, Tzadi, Ches, and Kuf. Now, found in those letters is the two words called Kates, which means the end, Chai, which means life. Kates, the end, Chai, life. Laughter is about being able to look at what you perceive as the end and living beyond that. Failure. Great, good, you failed. Move forward. There's a Kates, there's an end here. Chai, live after that. Laugh it off. You'll be able to recoup. At the end of the day, there's no such concept of end. There's no concept of end. Even death itself is not the end. It's just a new state of existence. To us, it seems like the end. To us, it seems like everything's done. There's nothing more than that. It says that a mother giving birth, it uses the lashon, it uses the language of laughter. Because at every moment of that birth, it looks like the end. It looks like everything is being done with. All the valves, everything is changing around. The baby's about to die, it looks like. I mean, if you imagine what's taking place there, you don't even need to imagine. I'm speaking to women. But in a moment, everything comes back to pieces, and we see what actually takes place, and life is there. And that's the state of laughter, that what looks like the end is never the end. There's always more after. There's always life after.
But what I don't get is Yitzhak was so stern, his name doesn't fit.
You ready for this? One of the most important attributes which Yitzhak represents, Gvura, strength.
Yitzhak is Gevurah, yeah.
One of the most important attributes for laughter is Gvura, strength. You know why? Because to be able to laugh at a situation and not be pulled in the direction of depression and into the direction of confusion, into the direction of anger or haste or all these things, you need to put up a barrier which needs strength. You need Gvura. You essentially need to be strong to be able to say, I'm not getting pulled into the emotional direction of this or that lazy feeling of that. I'm going to laugh it off and I'm going to move forward. I'm going to see the life after the end. Failure, I don't define myself by it. I could easily start falling into the natural emotional state of, oh, I can't believe I did this. I can't believe my life's like this. And I just don't leave the house and I just sit there on the couch and I sleep in bed.
So the boundaries.
So I need to put up boundaries. No, that's not going to affect me. I'm not going to be susceptible to that type of thinking. The most essential attribute is strength, is sternness. Okay. I'm strong and stern. I'm not going to let this get me. But I'm not going to let this get me, because if I do, I'm going to not be successful, and then my egos now come in, and the Trojan horse of the ego has killed you as well.
That he doesn't
what?
Doesn't laugh.
Why doesn't he laugh? Who said he doesn't laugh? Where do you see that he didn't laugh? Where do you see that he's such a stern character? I didn't see it. I didn't see any place he's stern. His father told him he was going to kill him. And he's like, all right, let's go. That's pretty chill to me. Okay, to conclude, we say, say the following. Look at the second source on the second page. It says, Or zarua l'tzadik, u'l'yishrei leiv simcha. Or zarua l'tzadik means the light will be planted for the righteous, and for those that are straight of heart have simcha, have happiness. Which means that there are people who are tzaddikim in this world. They do all the right things, but they're super depressed. They're really heavy people. And they do it for, and maybe what gives them a say of joy is knowing that they're doing the right thing, and they'll reap the rewards in the world to come, which means that the light is planted for them. But they do everything under an onerous way. It's very heavy. Everything's, quite heavy. And when they fail, they really, really beat themselves up, and they... But then there's another state. Not a tzaddik. Even higher than a tzaddik. Did you know there was a higher state than a tzaddik? And that's the state of yishrei leiv, straight of heart. Those are people that are straight of heart. Straight of heart, which means there's no deviation from what is. And what is, for sure, what is not you. Your external self doesn't feature. When your external self doesn't feature, when your conceptual self doesn't feature, what are you depressed about? It's all irrelevant. Just tap into what you need to do, tap into the now, tap into what's straight in front of you, and engage with what is. Don't beat yourself up about the past or worry continuously about the future. Engage with life, and that's a state of simcha. That's yishrei leiv, that's straight. Now, according to the Zohar, if you look at the last letters of each word, or I've made them bold for you, the last letter is Reish. Zarua, the last letter is Ayin. Latzadik, the last letter is Kuf. Uli Yishrei, last letter is Yud. Leiv. Simcha. Hey. What does that spell? Reish, Ayin, Kuf, Yud, Base, Hey. So if you're having difficulty spelling it, what's Re is usually a reference to Rabbi, and then what? Rabbi Akiva. Or Zarua Latzadik Yishrei Leiv Simcha is Rabbi Akiva. Which means the essential state of being is that you can look at the destruction of the temple and laugh. Now it sounds blasphemous. But if you don't do it from a state of sneering or mockery, but you essentially realize that whatever is, isn't really. It's all irrelevant. What you think about during the day and what you're worried about, I'm telling you, it's not worth it. It's so irrelevant. It's so rubbish. You're actually not worrying about anything substantial. Yes, you have to be pragmatic. Yes, you have to do what you need to do. And yes, you have to, but the state of dark, depressive heaviness doesn't do anything for you. Doesn't achieve anything. And when you find yourself in that state, which is inevitable, okay, be aware. Just be aware. Okay, that darkness has set in. Interesting. Don't define yourself by it. Don't start saying to yourself, oh, I've been infected, look how egoic I am. See if you can find the humor in life itself. And this is what we end off by singing in Shir HaMa'alos. Let's have a look at Shir HaMa'alos on page 3 or 5. We say Shir HaMa'alos, we sing this on Shabbos before we bench. Beshuv Hashem es shivas tzion ainu kecholmim. when Hashem will return us to the land of Israel, to Zion, which is the truest state of consciousness. It's not only a geographical place, but when we return to Israel, we return back to the Israel of ourselves. Hayinu kecholmim, we'll realize we were dreamers. Dreamers means that our entire lives is as if we were dreaming. If you look at the past and everything that you were worried about, we're here, guys. Siddur Ashkenaz, 2nd verse on the 3rd page. When God returns you or returns us to Israel, you will realize that we were dreamers. Everything you're worrying about, everything that happens in your life is all nothing. Nothing. Everything is nothing. It was all a dream. But only then, you see, this is a hard state to be in when we live in this world. When you look back at everything, it all seems like a dream. When you look now or in front, it all seems quite onerous. But what we are doing here is trying to create some form of a sensitivity, that it's not as serious as we make it. That maybe in the crying there is an external crying, but deeply internally there's a laughter. Then it says, then the mouth will be filled with laughter and joy, our tongue with joy. And we learn out from here that in this world it's actually prohibited to fill your mouth with laughter, which means you can't see the world as completely a form of laughter. It's impossible to laugh at life 100%. You can't fill your mouth. When there's tragedy, God forbid, it's impossible to be a person that laughs at it 100%. It's impossible. But can you find the 1% in there of laughter? Can you find the 99% of sorrow, sadness, maybe in certain circumstances, God forbid? But is there a percent of laughter? In the inner world, is there an understanding that, okay, let me not associate it too strongly with this conceptual idea or this reality? So at the end of the day, what is it actually? As Yoimru v'goyim higdil Hashem na'aseh simele. And then the nations of the world will say, how great is the name of God. Higdil Adonai la'aseh simanu haynu smeichim. Then we will be happy. Shuva Hashem eshivesenu ka'afikim ba'negev. Bring us back, God, to our dwelling place. Ka'afikim ba'negev, which means the afikim ba'negev is the valleys of the desert. Now, if you walk in the valleys of the desert, in Israel especially, it's one of the most dangerous places to be. I think only 2 or 3 years ago, there were a bunch of teenagers that were swept away by flash floods. And it's one of the most dangerous places to be. But what it does tell us is you could be looking at something and it looks like the desert. It looks like nothing's there. And then in a second there's a flash flood, which is showing us what laughter is. Laughter is understanding that I am perceiving this as the desert, but essentially it's not really. It's not even the desert. There can be a flash flood in a second. Things change immediately. Circumstances change in a second. So laugh. Failure can sometimes lead to the biggest successes. And that's what it means. Hazorim bedima barina yiktsoiro. We plant with our tears. A state of planting is, I don't see clearly. But we reap with song and joy. So ladies and gentlemen, to summarize and conclude. Don't take life too seriously. Be able to laugh at circumstances. Be able to observe yourself. Don't associate too deeply with your emotions, thoughts. Live inside of yourself as the simple observer. Be light. When days like Yom Kippur come along, these are days to dance. These are days of celebration of oneness. God is not someone up there that wants to punish you and hurt you and detach from you and give you your due justice. God wants you to be conscious. What conscious means is that you tap into life itself. Tap into every moment of life. Celebrate every moment of life. The simple things. That's what it means to be religious.